This is Natalie Wood, a woman whose life shimmered like a candle caught between beauty and storm, burning bright even as the winds around her never stopped rising. She was born Natalia Nikolaevna Zakharenko, the daughter of Russian immigrants who carried more ghosts than dreams. And from the moment she took her first steps, her destiny was written not by innocence, but by expectation. At only 4 years old, she was pushed into the spotlight, tiny, fragile, and already learning to smile on command while hiding everything that hurt. Hollywood adored her instantly. They saw the luminous eyes, the gentle voice, the delicate charm, but what they loved most, perhaps without knowing why, was her sadness. There was a quiet ache in her gaze, a depth far too old for a child, that made directors lean forward. Producers whisper, and audiences feel an emotion they couldn't name. Behind that look was fear, pressure, a mother who believed fame was survival, and a girl who had no choice but to obey. As she grew, Hollywood grew with her. She became the trembling heart of Rebel Without a Cause, the radiant Maria of West Side Story, the young woman who carried entire films with nothing more than longing in her eyes. Yet, with every role, every magazine cover, every carefully curated image, Natalie felt something slipping away. Her childhood, her voice, her freedom. And then there were the men, iconic, complicated, magnetic, who loved her intensely but never gently. Her first marriage, her second chances, her secret fears, and the shadow she could never outrun. Water. Because Natalie Wood spent her entire life fearing the ocean. And in the end, the ocean is where her story fell silent. Before she became Natalie Wood, before the tragic headlines and the unforgettable roles, there was a small girl named Natalia who never had the chance to decide who she wanted to be. Her childhood began not with play or exploration, but with an unspoken contract. She would fulfill her mother's dreams, even if they crushed her own. Born to Russian immigrants, haunted by the past, Natalia grew up in a home where fear and ambition shared the same breath. Her mother, Maria, carried her trauma like armor and believed that survival in America required fame, obedience, and absolute control. Maria watched Hollywood from the outside, like someone staring through a frosted window, convinced that if she could push her daughter inside, everything painful in their lives would finally be redeemed. So when Natalia was only 4, Maria placed her in front of a camera. The little girl barely understood English, but she understood fear. She sensed that her mother's happiness, their family's future, her own safety, all of it depended on her performance. Every smile, every tear, every gesture was commanded. They say, perfected. Acting wasn't a craft, it was submission. The defining wound of her childhood happened during the filming of The Green Promise. The script required the collapse of a wooden bridge. The effect was poorly executed, sending young Natalie tumbling into water with a scream that wasn't scripted. She hit the ground hard, injuring her wrist so severely that she carried a scar for life. as she cried in terror. Maria refused to comfort her. Instead, she pushed her back to set, insisting that real stars do not cry. That pain is simply the cost of greatness. That moment etched something permanent in Natalie. A fear of water and a realization that no one, not even her mother, would protect her. From then on, water symbolized danger, betrayal, and abandonment. Even years later, directors and friends noticed how her expression tightened whenever she was near the ocean. It wasn't dramatic, it was primal. Yet Hollywood adored her. Her small frame, expressive eyes, and instinctive vulnerability made her magnetic on screen. Studio executives praised her professionalism, mistaking her fear-driven obedience for talent. They loved that she didn't argue, didn't question, didn't demand special treatment. They saw the perfect child star. What they did not see was the girl who lay awake at night listening to her mother plan her future, or the child who learned to navigate life by anticipating the wishes of adults. Still, there was something undeniably luminous about Natalie. Beneath the pressure and the control, she had a natural sensitivity that made the camera lean toward her. When she entered an audition room, conversations paused. When she looked into the lens, her eyes seemed to reveal a world of longing, uncertainty, and fragile hope. Audiences connected to her immediately, sensing a depth that no studio could manufacture. By the age of 8, she was already a phenomenon. She had appeared in films, charmed directors, and become the financial anchor of her family. None of it felt like success to her. Childhood had slipped away quietly, leaving only responsibilities and expectations. She didn't dream of stardom. She couldn't, because she had never lived without it. For Natalie, fame wasn't a goal, it was the only world she had ever been allowed to inhabit. And as Hollywood reached out its hand, she took it not with excitement, but with resignation. Destiny, shaped by the ambitions of others, had already chosen her path. By the time Natalie stepped into her teenage years, she was no longer merely a child star. She was a girl suspended between two worlds. One she had already outgrown, and one she wasn't yet ready to enter. Hollywood, however, had no interest in her uncertainty. Studios wanted transformation, maturity, and beauty on schedule, and they wanted it from her immediately. Natalie felt the shift the moment she turned 13. Directors no longer asked her to play innocent children, but troubled, yearning girls whose emotions ran deeper than their years. It was a strange contradiction. She was expected to portray feelings she had barely begun to understand. Yet she understood them anyway, because she had lived with fear and longing her entire life. And then came Rebel Without a Cause. The film offered her something she had never been given, a chance to express a truth that had always lived inside her. As Judy, Natalie delivered a performance filled with trembling vulnerability, fragile anger, and a desire to be loved without conditions. Emotions pulled directly from the shadows of her own life. The role earned her an Academy Award nomination at just 16. But the recognition felt both surreal and distant. What mattered more was how the camera finally captured what she had always been. A girl aching for safety. Working alongside James Dean only amplified that truth. He was enigmatic, intense, unpredictable, someone who lived every feeling at full volume. Natalie was drawn to him instantly, not because of romance, though rumors swirled, but because he saw beneath her polished studio image. He recognized the sadness behind her eyes, the pressure she carried like a second skin. Between takes, they shared quiet conversations about fear, identity, and the pain of being shaped by others. Dean encouraged her to trust her instincts, to explore her inner life instead of suppressing it. For Natalie, whose emotions had long been controlled and curated, his presence was liberating. Their connection created an energy on screen that became iconic. Audiences felt it, a mix of longing, grief, and unspoken understanding. It was the moment Natalie Wood stopped being a child actress and became a symbol of American youth. Restless, wounded, searching. But success brought its own burdens. Studios began marketing her as the new face of teenage desire, a fragile beauty with the most expressive eyes in Hollywood. Natalie hated the way they sexualized her, reshaping her image before she even reached adulthood. She wanted to explore complex roles, to grow as an artist. But the industry wanted her to remain eternally lovely, eternally vulnerable. Her relationship with her mother grew even more strained. Maria continued to control every interview, every meeting, every decision. She criticized Natalie's weight, her clothes, her voice. She warned her never to appear weak, never to reveal the fear she carried. Ironically, it was that very fear that made Natalie magnetic. The world didn't know her wounds, but they sensed them. During this period, Natalie also began experiencing the first hints of a loneliness that would follow her forever. Surrounded by fans, photographers, and studio executives, she often felt unseen. She could make millions feel something on screen, yet she struggled to feel understood in real life. Still, she kept working. Film after film, press tour after press tour, party after party. Her star rose with dizzying speed. But the girl at the center of the whirlwind remained unsure of who she truly was. Hollywood wanted a perfect symbol, not a real young woman. And so, even as the world celebrated her, Natalie Wood entered adulthood carrying the same quiet ache she had known since childhood. The fear that love was conditional and that she would always be performing for someone. By the early 1960s, Natalie Wood was not just a star, she was a phenomenon. Her face appeared on billboards, magazine covers, and theater posters across the country. Hollywood adored her. But more than that, it depended on her. She was the rare performer who could draw audiences simply by existing on a screen. Her eyes carrying more emotion than most actors could express in an entire monologue. Yet with every new success came a deeper sense of contradiction. The more the world celebrated her, the more she questioned whether any of it truly belonged to her. Her ascension continued with Splendor in the Grass, a film that peeled back layers of her own emotional history. playing a young woman fractured by forbidden love and societal expectations. Natalie delivered a performance so raw that even her co-star Warren Beatty was stunned by her intensity. The vulnerability she brought to the role came from a place she rarely accessed, her own wounds. Long buried beneath years of obedience and perfectionism, critics called it the best work of her career. And Natalie received her second Academy Award nomination. But privately, the praise felt bittersweet. She had given the world a piece of herself, and she wasn't sure she could ever get it back. Her relationship with Warren Beatty became one of the most whispered about romances in Hollywood. They were young, magnetic, rebellious, and perfectly matched in ambition. But the relationship was tumultuous, shaped by ego, jealousy, and the constant scrutiny of the press. Warren was electrifying and unpredictable. Natalie was emotional and perceptive. Together, they created fire. Yet fire consumes. Their connection illuminated many truths, but it also burned through whatever stability Natalie longed for. In the end, the relationship collapsed under the weight of their competing desires. Then came West Side Story, a cinematic triumph that further cemented her status. She played Maria with innocence and aching sincerity, but the experience carried an unseen sting. The studio decided to dub her singing voice without telling her, a decision that left her humiliated and furious. It was a reminder of how little control she truly had. Even at the height of her fame, she was the face of the film, yet not its voice. Hollywood loved her image, but it did not trust her authenticity. As her career climbed, the studio tightened its grip on her public persona. She was expected to remain elegant, graceful, heartbreakingly beautiful, never angry, never messy, never complicated. Every outfit, every interview, every love interest was scrutinized and approved by executives. Behind the scenes, Natalie felt increasingly suffocated. She wanted to play flawed, complex, emotionally dangerous women. But Hollywood wanted the girl with the sad eyes. The pressure began to erode her from within. She suffered bouts of anxiety, insomnia, and emotional exhaustion. She confided in friends that she often felt like she was performing even when the cameras weren't rolling. Fame had become a role she could never escape. At 24, Natalie had achieved what most actors spend their entire lives chasing: power, acclaim, and artistic respect. Yet she felt strangely hollow. The spotlight illuminated everything except who she really was. Still, she pushed forward. She worked relentlessly, afraid that slowing down meant losing the identity she had been forced into since childhood. Hollywood fed on her vulnerability, and she, unable to imagine a life beyond the industry, continued giving more of herself than she ever intended. Natalie Wood had become one of the most desired women in the world, but the price of being wanted was steep. She no longer knew where the performance ended and she began. For Natalie Wood, love was never simple. She yearned for tenderness, for protection, for someone who could quiet the noise that had followed her since childhood. Yet the men she chose brilliant, charismatic, deeply flawed, often echoed the same contradictions she had grown up with. Passion mixed with control, affection tangled with fear. No relationship embodied this more than her romance with Robert Wagner. When Natalie first met Wagner, she was a teenager on the cusp of stardom. He was an established actor. Lush blossom. To the world. They looked like a fairy tale Hollywood couple. Her fragile beauty paired with his sophisticated charm. But beneath the glamorous veneer lay a dynamic shaped by insecurity, jealousy, and emotional imbalance. Natalie adored Wagner with the intensity of someone who had never been allowed to love freely. He, in turn, saw in her both a rising star and a young woman who seemed to need him. That combination was intoxicating and dangerous. They married when Natalie was just 19. For a brief moment, she believed she had finally found safety, a harbor from the relentless expectations of Hollywood. But Wagner was a man who struggled with the spotlight shifting away from him. Natalie's fame grew rapidly, his plateaued. Rumors, suspicions, and quiet resentments began to settle between them. The more successful she became, the more he felt eclipsed, and the more she shrank herself to maintain peace. Their home life was a delicate dance of affection and tension. Friends later described scenes of tenderness interrupted by sudden arguments. Moments of warmth followed by cold silences. Natalie wanted a partner who could see her, not the star, not the image, but the vulnerable woman beneath. Wagner loved her, yet his love carried expectations she could not always fulfill. He wanted her presence, her devotion, her admiration. She wanted space to breathe. As their marriage began to crack, Natalie's loneliness deepened. Hollywood's pressure had always weighed heavily on her, but marital turmoil made it heavier. She found solace in work, in friendships, and eventually in the arms of another man, the British producer Richard Gregson. He was thoughtful, gentle, someone who seemed to understand the fragility behind her confidence. Their relationship brought her a sense of calm she had been missing. And eventually, she married him. For a moment, Natalie tasted the life she had always imagined: motherhood, domestic warmth, a slower kind of love. She gave birth to her daughter, Courtney, a joy she described as healing. But even this new beginning was not safe from betrayal. When Gregson's infidelity came to light, the foundation she had rebuilt shattered. Heartbroken and exhausted, she ended the marriage. The wound cut deeper because she had believed, perhaps naively, that she had finally escaped the patterns of her past. And then, in one of the surprising turns of her life, she returned to Robert Wagner. The reunion baffled many, but to Natalie, it made emotional sense. Wagner represented history, familiarity, and the first version of love she had ever known. Their second marriage was more mature, steadier in some ways, yet still shadowed by old insecurities. They welcomed her daughter Natasha into their blended family, forming a picture-perfect tableau for the public. But no relationship built on longing. fear. And unspoken scars can remain peaceful forever. Natalie continued to battle internal doubts, while Wagner's possessiveness never fully disappeared. They loved each other deeply, but that love carried storms neither of them could control. It was within this fragile, complicated marriage, full of devotion and unresolved tension, that Natalie's final chapter would unfold. The final chapter of Natalie Wood's life unfolded over a single haunting weekend, Thanksgiving 1981, on the quiet, fog-draped waters near Catalina Island. What should have been a peaceful escape became instead one of the enduring mysteries in Hollywood history. To this day, no one truly knows what happened on that boat. What is known, however, is this. Natalie Wood, a woman who had feared deep water her entire life, somehow ended up alone in the black ocean she dreaded most. Natalie, her husband Robert Wagner, her co-star Christopher Walken, and the boat's captain Dennis Davern left the mainland for what was supposed to be a simple weekend aboard the yacht Splendor. From the outside, it looked like a retreat among friends and colleagues. Beneath the surface, the emotions were more volatile. Insecurity, jealousy, unspoken resentment, and the kind of tension that grows quietly until something breaks. Walken and Natalie had been working closely together on the film Brainstorm. They shared conversations about art, ambition, and the sacrifices demanded by their profession. Wagner, already sensitive to any shift in attention, could not ignore their connection. According to later accounts, he worried about being pushed into the background, not only in Hollywood, but in his marriage. Alcohol made everything sharper, louder, and less forgiving. On that final night, the group dined on shore, drank heavily, and returned to the yacht as the water around them turned to liquid darkness. Inside the boat, words began to cut. A discussion about Natalie's career, about the time she dedicated to work, turned sour. Voices rose. Wagner and Walken argued. Natalie, exhausted by conflict and the need to mediate, moved between them like someone trying to quiet a storm she did not start. What happened next exists only in fragments. Davern would later claim he heard a violent argument, objects being thrown, and a sudden, heavy silence. Wagner's and Walken's versions of the night shifted over time. Some details emerged, others retreated. Timelines blurred. Intention dissolved into ambiguity. The only person who could have described how it felt to stand there, caught between husband and co-star, is the one who never returned. At some point, Natalie disappeared from the cabin. A small dinghy, usually tied securely to the yacht, was found adrift. Natalie's body was discovered hours later, floating in the cold Pacific, wearing a nightgown, socks, and a jacket. The coroner's report listed bruises on her arms and legs, as well as an abrasion on her cheek. The official ruling at the time, accidental drowning, possibly while attempting to secure the dinghy after it came loose. For many, that explanation never made emotional sense. Natalie Wood, who had spent a lifetime terrified of dark, open water, climbing alone into a dinghy at night? It felt less like an answer and more like a placeholder. As years passed, doubts only grew louder. Davern changed his story, suggesting that the original investigation ignored crucial details. Witnesses on nearby boats reported hearing a woman crying for help in the night. In 2011, the case was reopened, and the cause of death was amended to drowning and other undetermined factors. Wagner was named a person of interest. Still, no charges were filed. No final truth emerged. What remains is not a clear narrative, but a haunting contrast. A girl pushed into the spotlight, a woman who carried her fears with elegance, and a final image of her lost in the very element she had always dreaded. In the end, the ocean did not just claim her life, it claimed her story, leaving behind questions, whispers, and the ache of knowing answers never surface. Natalie Wood's story does not end with the mystery that surrounds her final night. It lingers far beyond it, like a soft echo carried across the water she feared. A reminder of a woman who spent her entire life balancing grace and fragility, strength and vulnerability, spotlight and silence. Her legacy is not defined by tragedy, but by the impossible beauty with which she navigated a world that demanded everything from her long before she understood the rules. She was the child who learned to smile on command, the teenager who carried the hopes of a studio, the young woman who poured her soul into every role, and the adult who kept searching for a safe place to love and be loved. Natalie lived with an intensity that illuminated every frame she touched. You can see it in Rebel Without a Cause, in Splendor in the Grass. I want, wish. Even now, decades later, her performances feel startlingly alive, as if something within her refused to fade. And perhaps that is why her loss still haunts Hollywood. Not merely because the truth remains elusive, but because Natalie herself was a constellation of contradictions. She was delicate yet determined, guarded yet luminous, shaped by fear yet capable of enormous empathy. Her eyes, those expressive, unforgettable eyes, carried a depth that no script could ever fully capture. When people remember her, they do not speak only of fame. They speak of feeling something when they watched her, something tender and undefinable. They speak of the ache behind her smile, the sincerity in her voice, the courage it took to survive as long as she did in a world that so often tried to control her. The ocean may have taken her story's final page, but the rest remains, etched in memory, preserved in film, and carried in the hearts of those who still see her not as a mystery, but as a woman whose light refused to go out.